And we're back once again. Here we are, Painfully Honest Tech Podcast. We are back once again. Didn't I say that? I said that already. I've only said 2 sentences, and I'm already repeating myself. Uh,
It's
so,
like Eminem. Guess who's
Painfully
back?
Honest Tech Podcast. Yeah, Painfully Honest Tech Podcast. The podcast so honest it hurts. We're here again. It's another week, another journey through the tech odyssey. You see how I did that?
Yes.
Yeah, that's
I
pretty
like
good,
that.
huh?
Nice
We've
segue.
got Adam Matlock here, as well as myself, Jason T. Lubis, the JTL. So, what are we going to talk about that's so honest this week that it hurts?
Well,
I
hopefully
guess
not
the
more
big,
fashion advice.
yeah, we don't want to give more fashion advice, although I do think it's good advice. And any discerning male over the age of say 35 would be, you know, we're talking about our love for Dickies. Let's not get off track here. Uh, so, um, overalls are so
Pixel 8.
comfortable, though. Yeah, Pixel 8 is the big news. The Pixel 8 Pro. Oh, now it makes a word now. Pixel 8.
Yeah, Pixel 8, pixelated.
Yeah. So now it's the Pixel 8.
That's
Pixel
kind of
8
neat.
Pro.
It
Yeah.
only took us
I
8
just
generations to get there.
I just heard that, and so the
I bet
number and
you.
the yeah.
I bet you
So
some Google engineer 8 years ago was like, "Hey guys, once we
can't
get to
wait
the
until
8th, we can say Pixel 8."
freaking nerds. Have I ever told you about like if tech was a dorm floor at a university? Like who lives in what room? Because all the rooms are like known for something, right?
uh,
And so my theory is that Apple is like kind of the preppy but uber fashionable dude in the who's always got tons of people like hanging around him, right?
yeah,
Microsoft obviously are the nerds, right?
obviously.
They're down like on one end of the hall, and there's just lots of snacks lots of snacks, lots of Pringles, lots of taco flavored Doritos, and Mountain Dew, I guess, or some subsidiary of Mountain Dew. And then on the other end of the hallway is Google, right?
hmm
And Google's room is on the corner, and it has like one of those printed sheets that's all like tie dye looking, and
But
it's mailed.
Does Google's room have windows?
They've been blocked off with these tie dye like wall coverings, right?
Mhm.
So they've tacked these things up over the door, over the windows. There's like a big hookah sitting on the desk, and everybody in Google who hangs out in Google's room is stoned 24/7, right? And they just sit around the room and they say, "Dude, wouldn't it be so awesome if we just made like these glasses that like could also show you stuff that's not there, but it's there, you know? And then we could like merge all of our social medias into one social media so that it would be really cool." And thus is born the Google graveyard, right?
Yeah,
Where all of Google's stoner ideas have gone to die.
yeah.
Um,
Like Google
Remember
Glass.
Google TV? Like before there was Google TV, there was Google TV,
Yeah.
and it was actually like a TV box, I think, or something. Anyway, so they finally made some Google stoner happy with Pixel 8. He's been waiting. He's been hanging out in
8
like
years.
the sandbox at Google HQ for 8 years, waiting to get to this point. But
Yeah,
and now it's here. So yeah,
last year he's at the water cooler. He's like, "Next year, guys, Pixel 8."
you know I've have you ever heard like the stories of like what Google's headquarters is like?
No,
That you
I
can
don't
like
wanna know.
bring your dog to work. It's encouraged, and they have like play areas. It's like elementary school for
That's probably
dorks.
why they just laid off like 20,000 people this year. They realized that too many people were hanging out at the coffee bar and not doing enough work.
Yeah, yeah. Just learning to roll, learning to roll their own sushi instead of
Coding.
fixing whatever else that needs fixed at Google. So, Google, the stoners of tech, have now brought us the eighth phone, in 10 years, I think, right? So, or close to 10 years.
So they're
And
actually the only ones that haven't skipped a number. Because if you
they
take a look, the iPhone skipped a number. They skipped the 9,
yeah,
and then Samsung with the Note, they skipped. Well, they skipped they kind of skipped it because it came out and then it got retracted, and then we went to the Note 8. So
and then
uh,
yeah, so but Samsung went from Note 10 to Note 20,
yeah, they skipped 10.
right?
Yeah, Samsung doesn't do the maths very well. Like
Yeah, or
I don't.
maybe it's Korean math and we just don't understand. It's possible. I
There's a lot of things in this world I don't understand. But so iPhone, they went straight from the 8 to the 10 and then picked up with the 11.
but
And it was so ambiguous.
it was the 10th year though.
It
That's the weird
was.
thing about the iPhone.
That's because of
So
the delay before the numbers, because they had the iPhone and then they created the iPhone 2G. Oh, no, sorry, the 2G was the first one, and then they
and then
created the iPhone
yeah,
3G, and
yeah,
then
and then they had the 3GS.
yeah,
And so that started
but they
the
had to get
S
caught up.
numbers. Yeah.
Which
Well, the thing
yeah,
about Google is they when they hit the 5, didn't they skip a year where they had the Pixel 5 and then it was like a year or 8 months or 9 months or
I want to
something?
say it was like a year and a half, because
Yeah,
I think the Pixel 5 came out in the summer. I think it came out in like July, and then they ended up with the Pixel 6 in October. So I think it was like a 15-month launch cycle, but that's because they were migrating over to the Tensor from the Snapdragon, because remember the Pixel 5 had the Snapdragon 765 in it.
right. And also, I mean, I don't know if COVID impacted that release schedule or not, but seems to have impacted everything else. Uh,
It certainly
it's
impacted my life.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I didn't notice it as much because I'd just gone full time on YouTube, but it did make me nervous. It did
Yeah,
make me nervous.
that's why I didn't
Um,
quit my job for so long.
yeah, well, if I had only had
Crystal
the
ball.
crystal ball that showed me at least like 3 months ahead,
I
then I would have
remember
known.
so I met you in person when we were at CES 2020, and
Yeah,
we're sitting around talking, and you're like, "Yeah, I just went full time." I'm like, "Man, that's awesome. Like, I hope to do that one day." And I don't know when, because I wasn't making that. Whatever we met, I had 4,200 subscribers 3.5 years
right,
ago. And so
right,
I was like, it wasn't even on my radar. I was like, I'm just happy to be getting a few views, you know. I was just that guy that paid to go to CES that was happy to be there.
right.
And I was like, this is so cool. And you're like, yeah, I just went full time. Like, man, that's crazy.
Yeah.
And then COVID happened, and then I was like, that's terrible. I
Yeah.
was like, thank
Well,
goodness I haven't quit my job.
yeah, it was definitely nerve-wracking, and it made me for one, it made me not wanna make the kind of content that I had been making, because nothing seemed more useless than to complain about smartphone features, and
When the
shake my
world's falling
fist at
apart.
yeah, the world is falling apart, hundreds of thousands of people are dying, and I'm complaining about 120 hertz refresh rate existing or not
It sounds a
existing.
little
So
tone deaf in those situations.
yeah, so yeah, and that's when I started doing the Amazon streaming as well. And I will say that uh, Amazon paid my bills through that whole rigmarole. So thank you, Amazon. Even though, as all good things do, that Amazon started. I won't say they screwed their live streaming creators, but you could say that. I won't say it, but you could say that.
You could say that. One could say that. Well,
Yeah. So
now
talk to me about the Pixel 8 and 8 Pro, because honestly, I've sort of I've watched the headlines. I know the bullet points, but I don't know a ton
so I'm
about
gonna
the
tell you something
details.
really, really exciting that's gonna make a lot of people clap and not shake their fists at the sky. They both have 120 hertz.
Ooh.
There's yeah, no 60 hertz.
Didn't
I mean,
the
last year it was
didn't
90 and 120, but they both went to 120 this year. And everybody's excited because the 8 Pro now has a flat screen.
Ooh, that's
At
good.
least at least
That's
at
good.
least that's what I've read. I mean, I don't have one yet. The overlords at Google didn't send me one early, I was not invited to the event. Contrary, to, I mean, I wasn't expecting to get an invitation. I never am, but they didn't invite me.
I don't understand how they choose who to invite, because I mean, what people might not understand is that in the tech community of people who make videos about tech, um, we know each other at least well enough to converse on Twitter or something, you know?
Yeah,
So I noticed that some people got invited who hadn't been invited to things before, and some people didn't get invited who I would have thought definitely would have gotten invited, like yourself. You
it's
know, that
weird. So, just for a little bit of the inner workings, I'm going to reveal some of the secrets of Team Pixel.
ooh,
Yeah,
I wish I had a sound effect for this.
so there's two different groups. There's people who work directly with Google marketing,
Yeah,
and there's Team Pixel folks. So the people who work traditionally with Google marketing, even though some of them don't get invited, but those are people like iJustine,
yeah,
MKBHD, Dave 2D. They work with the traditional PR branch of Google.
the fancy muckety mucks. Yeah,
Yeah, and then there's Team Pixel. Now, Team Pixel is more. Now they work with typically smaller creators, but they work with larger creators as well, and they're more of the fan-driven kind of grassroots experience.
yeah,
And nobody from Team Pixel prior to this event has been invited. There hasn't been invites for that, and they made a couple spots available this time to send a few Team Pixel folks. I think it was only like two or three. So
right.
that's why you don't see a lot of like Team Pixel people don't really get invited to it. And then I'm sure that some people decline. Like I'm sure some people like I don't think did MKBC even go to the event? I don't even know if he went
Uh,
to.
I think he and some other folks like Michael Fisher and some of the other higher echelon YouTubers, I think they get an opportunity to have some me time with the devices, whether or not they go to the events.
Oh, they'll get him early.
Because
Like,
I know,
there's no way they're not going to send one to MKBHD if he declines to show up at the
well,
event. But
he has it already. I mean, he probably, if he didn't have it before, he picked it up when the event happens, whether or not he goes to the event. Because I remember going to Samsung events, and there were sort of a couple of tiers of people. There were the people who
yeah,
got
there's tears.
invited to the event, and got the swag and all that stuff. But then there were also people who had worked with Samsung's PR people for a long time, or were large enough channels that that it was appropriate that they get this treatment. But they would get to go upstairs for a couple of hours and look at the stuff, or they would have been at another event
And
a
sometimes
week
people will
or
show
so
up for that.
before. Yeah.
So Samsung typically does it like a week prior. Like before their event,
Hmm.
they'll have a thing like in New York. And I tried to
Right.
go to that this go around, and they were like, we don't have any seats, like we don't have any openings available. Like Samsung, I got invited to the S23 launch, but they didn't give me a phone, and I had to pay my own way. So they gave me an invite, and I went, and I was just excited to go because I had always wanted to go, but they didn't give me any phones. But after the event, they had the special area for people to go who were supposed to get a phone, and then there was also places set up where it's
Yeah.
ideal for content creation.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was my experience as well. I think so you said there were two groups of people. There are really three groups of people.
Yeah,
There's the people who are part of Team Pixel, or part of like that lower tier, get invited to the event at Samsung or something like that. And then there's the people that work with the official marketing people.
hmm
Um, and then there's me, the guy who doesn't get invited to anything anymore. I have made
Hey,
myself persona non grata.
well, I mean, I don't understand. I don't know exactly what happened because I know you were with Team Pixel at one time, and I thought for
Yeah,
years they were going to take away. I thought they were
I
going to
know
take
what's
away my
happened.
smoking jacket because I don't always say nice things.
Well, I was, this was back in my younger days when I was a little bit more vociferous in my uh, critiques, and I made some choice analogies that I don't think were appreciated by the Pixel people. So when Team Pixel came around the next year, I didn't get the email. And then I emailed about not getting the email and tried to be nice, and they just ignored me. So, and
Yeah,
Samsung is kind of the same thing. I went to a Samsung event in 2018, so I think it was like the S10 Note 10 event, and then I never got invited again. So, but I never got phones from Samsung either. Um, and
I've gotten
I
one.
I have talked to other people who have had more experience with Samsung in particular, and the thought was that perhaps I had upset someone in Korea, and that's why I had uh, I had been ousted.
That's all right. I just upset somebody with them recently. The problem is whenever you have painfully honest impressions on things, or whenever I don't want to say honest, because a lot of people, I don't want to insinuate that reviewers don't make honest videos, because so many of them do. But
Yeah,
there is like a certain category off to the side where I don't mince words.
yeah,
I may not be as upfront PC about certain things, or I'm like, yeah, I'll say something sucks if I think it sucks. Um, but
exactly.
I've never approached things from a perspective where I expect people to send me stuff. If you want to
Yeah,
send me something, I expect that it's because you believe in my process and how transparent I am with my audience.
yeah.
And I think that that's more important to me. But it's one of those things where, yeah, I don't expect to get a lot of invitations, but I think I'm very fair whenever I evaluate things.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think that I mean I approach things differently now than I did 5 years ago. Obviously, um, I'm still I'm still always going to give an unvarnished opinion, and I'm going to sometimes state that opinion for effect. Uh, but the thing that the way that I look at it is this: it's like if you're going to hand out invitations and devices to people who have made enough of an impact in the creator space to have, in your opinion, a valuable voice, right? To
Hmm.
whatever level. If you're going to then sort of take them away from that, and you're gonna uninvite them
Hmm.
because they said something that you didn't like. I mean, to me, that's unprofessional.
I think so.
Because if you're in a business relationship with somebody and you have an issue
You
with
talk
how
about it.
something was done, then you contact that person and you say, "Hey, the way that this was done, just wasn't cool for us." But neither company ever made I mean, I'm small fry in the larger scheme of all that stuff, right? Because I'm sitting here where I am on YouTube, and tens of thousands of people would be happy to be there, but when I jump up to that level, they care like they care what MKBHD and all those folks are
Yes.
gonna think. That's their bread and butter, and I'm just a garnish to the side, right?
Well, it's funny because you look at our perspectives. Like, I've got 130,000 subscribers. You got just over 200,000 subscribers. And looking from the outside in, you would think that that would be a shoe in for these brand relationships in it. And in fact, it's not. And you realize there's like 1,000 YouTubers out there in the similars that we don't have
Yeah,
millions. When you have
yeah,
millions, the brands reach out to you. When you have 100 or 200,000, they don't.
yeah, and there are ways to work that and to sort of make goals for yourself and say like, well, I want to be to the point where I'm one of those people. Um, but for me, I just wasn't like I'm not willing to and I'm not willing to soft pedal or curry favor with I'm not a very social person to begin with. So I'm not good at making friends in those kinds of situations. And and other people are, and everybody's got their strengths. But I guess for me, I just decided if that's the way it's going to be, then I don't really care. Um, I'll buy the phones and still say what I want to say, and
That's
you
pretty
know,
much how I've rolled for a long time. I mean, it's funny because that's how we started.
yeah,
Yeah, we had to buy everything, and then you get to a point where you might get sent a few things here and there. And actually, we were talking about this earlier because you and I both have something exciting we can't talk about right now.
Yep,
But
that's right.
yet, but very soon. Uh,
Very
and
soon.
and I think there are brands that appreciate that though, because I have a couple brands that I've worked with for years, and I just because of the relationship, and they know how I work, and I think they know how you work. They still keep us on the list, and
Yeah.
that's nice, and I greatly appreciate those relationships.
Well, I remember when that CES that you were talking about. Um, I remember talking to an audio company, and I introduced myself, and the person that I spoke to was like, "Oh, I'm afraid to send you our stuff." I and I was just I didn't know if that was a compliment or what it was. I was flattered to a certain extent, but then also like expand that out to all the different relationships that you could get into, and then how many companies are looking at the name of my channel or watching one of my videos and saying, I don't know if we should send. I feel like if you feel good about your product,
It shouldn't matter. It's
then
just stand on his face.
yeah, and take take negative feedback or positive feedback in any way that you deem worthwhile. There are plenty of companies that have had suggestions from creators
It
that
made
they
them
have then
better.
incorporated into the next version of the product. So to me it seems somewhat petty on for a company like a Samsung to just be like off the list, you know, and they have one of the most successful mobile phones in the world. So obviously they could take some criticism, but they choose not to. I don't know. I'm sort of inserting my assumptions because no one ever reached out to me to say this is the situation, right? So I just have to guess. And ultimately it's been a bunch of years at this point for both. And there's somebody that we know on Twitter that usually works with Pixel and the promotions team, and I can't even get that person to like respond to a DM. Like that's how far gone my relationship with Google is. And
Well, so I'm not under an NDA, but I'm also guessing at this point. So I have a package that's supposed to show up tomorrow from Google,
ah,
and I've been with Team Pixel for like 4 years now, but they don't tell you what they're sending you until like the
right.
box shows up. So the last 2 years, it was the Pixel 6 Pro and the Pixel 7 Pro, and they'll put together like a neat little box, and they're like, please share
Yeah,
this so people can see the cool box and all that stuff. I'm
I
hoping
got
it's
that
both.
once.
I'm hoping it's. I'm still upset. I have not got the Google socks. Like so many people have got the cool Google socks, and I'm like, come on, man. I know it's 100 degrees down here, but I want some Google socks. But
I
I've seen
I
the
got the
box.
beanie.
Oh, you got the
I got
beanie.
Yeah,
I
that
got
was the
I
Pixel
got
3 XL.
I got the boonie hat that was too small for
Oh,
me.
right,
so so I'm expecting a box tomorrow, which has to be signature signed by an adult. Like my kids can't sign or anything, but I'll be
right,
waiting patiently at the front door tomorrow. But I'm hoping I've seen the boxes gone to like the UK because they've already got theirs, and I've
right.
seen boxes and it shows the Pixel 7, the Pro, and the Watch.
Yeah.
So that would be a first. If they send all three out, I don't know, and I'm going to buy whatever I don't get anyway because that's just how things work. But I'm excited about the phone because this last couple of years, I've probably been one of the most vocal critics and also the biggest supporters because I like what they're doing. I think that they're doing a good thing. I like what they do with Android, with their take on things now, with especially with Material U and getting
Right.
away from that just bland developer looking stock Android experience. Like they've really improved that a lot.
Yep.
But the Tensor adventure has been very frustrating because the first Tensor, it had heat problems, the battery wasn't good, the modem sucked, and it didn't have facial recognition for all the weird reasons. It's like there's a lot of things, and Android 12 just had a lot of problems.
Right.
So the phone showed up, the Pixel 6, and everyone's like, "Oh, it's amazing, phone of the year." And then everybody quit making content after the first week, and then they started having serious issues. So I'm like,
Right.
okay,
Yeah.
so that rubbed people the wrong way because everyone's like, "You just said this was the best phone, and now my phone is like the modem doesn't work. So
Right.
there were some issues. And then they cleaned a lot of that up with the Pixel 7. Pixel 7 refined things, built on that, and we've been seeing progress. But I mean, it had problems. There were some people whose camera lenses would spontaneously shatter, like buttons popping off after like 2 months. So it had
Right.
some quality control issues and still some heat related stuff. So the Tensor 3 and this new kind of approach that they've got going on here, they actually changed the chip. So a lot of
Yeah.
people don't know this, and I spend so much time defending them because everyone's like, "Oh, it's got an Exynos chip." No, like it uses the Samsung Foundry process. It uses their same node, but from the ground up, architecture is different. Like the
Right.
Google Tensor and Tensor 2 actually had two primary cores and not one, which was a big difference between the way the rest of the world does business. This one has 9 cores, not 8.
Oh,
It has their one primary core, which now has 3 gigahertz speed. It does it actually does ray tracing, hardware-based ray tracing, but it
cool.
has four mid cores, 4 lower end cores, and 2 primary cores. So instead of having one primary core, 4 mids and 4 lows instead of 2 primaries and 2 mids. So they've
Right.
changed the architecture again.
So, and that would be similar to like, say the Apple M series or the A series chips that have high efficiency cores and have, so
Well,
all they
they all have high so the standard configuration in an Android chip is you have 8 cores, and you'll have 1 primary core and usually 3 mid cores and then 4 low end cores.
right.
And that way you've
Okay.
got the high end one, the big horsepower that handles the big stuff. You've got the mid cores that kind of handle medium level tasks. And then it's like if you're opening Twitter, you don't need 3 gigahertz. They just use the 2.1 or 1.9 gigahertz low end core. So
Mhm.
now this one, 4 and 4 for the mid and the low, and then one high powered core. So it's kind of
Right.
interesting the way that they've done it this time. And I'm curious if that's going to bring some of the heat down since they're not using 2 primary cores anymore.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they shift some of the load for back end stuff onto like a lesser chip, and so it wouldn't necessarily heat up the way like a you
They're
know
very weird because
yeah,
they have their proprietary tensor core in there too. So they have a dedicated tensor processing unit, a TPU core in there, which now is, I think, clocked at like 1.1 gigahertz. So it's like you've got the GPU, which has
right,
all its cores, and then you've got the CPU, and then it's got the tensor processing unit, and then the modem and all that stuff, all built into one chip. Like it's crazy.
right, yeah,
So I'm curious to see where the rubber meets the road, how much efficiency, like how much better is the modem, how much better is the heat, how much better is the battery life and the power.
right. And a lot of that stuff you can't really know, like, say, how reliable the modem's gonna be until you've used it for enough time to have made, dozens of phone calls, right?
Well, it also depends because sometimes they could perform well on one frequency and they could perform worse on another frequency. So if you're an AT&T customer in New York City, your modem
Yeah.
is going to have a vastly different experience than me using T-Mobile in Houston.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
and that can really impact some of that stuff. So that's some people are like, "Oh, mine heats up and mine has these issues." And some people are like, "What are you talking about? Mine's perfectly fine."
Right. Yeah. It I'll be interested as you mentioned, earlier, 120 hertz screens on both,
Yes. And
which is
also
a which is
brighter. So
oh,
they
well,
now
yeah.
have the brightest screens. Which is crazy
So,
because the Pixels have always had more dim screens.
are we now officially in the nits war?
Yeah, the nits war. So the new Pixel 8 Pro, if I remember correctly, is 2,400 nits,
Mhm.
and the Pixel 8 is going to
That's
be
crazy.
2,000.
2,400 nits. I think that's brighter than most, like, QLED TVs get.
It's crazy. Yeah, 2,400 nits peak brightness, with basically the top end. It's called HBM. I don't know what HBM means, but I just that's like not auto brightness outside the sun is 1,600
Right.
nits. So they have some. It's just some context, all right. So a lot of people they say, "Oh, mine's going to be 2,000 nits." Well, only if you have it on auto brightness and you're standing out in the sun, and then it will
Right.
elevate that brightness so you can see better outdoors. if you're using
Right.
2400 nits brightness, I would like you'll be in district court because you get sued because it burns your retinas in the middle of the night. Like you,
Yeah.
if you want to wake
Yeah.
up to 2400 nits and it's 2 in the morning, you're not going to see for a few minutes.
Yeah, but you're gonna have retina damage. It's just gonna
You're like my eyes.
Google's gonna get sued because they burn people's corneas out.
Yeah, we're like no, like now I have to watch. How bright is too bright? Because you can see now, like the new Apple Watch Ultra 2 goes to what, like 3000 nits.
Yeah.
I feel like we're in an episode of Dragon Ball Z now. It's like his power level is over 5000.
Well, the thing about an Apple Watch at 3000 nits is that okay, so you obviously have the challenge of seeing the phone in sunlight and other lighting situations, but it's also a very much smaller screen.
You're not like
And so
this either.
yeah, and so it seems like the brightness would have to be elevated in order to sort of have that screen pop. When you one thing that's always impressed me about smartwatches in general, Apple Watches in particular, is how somehow, and I don't know if it's brightness related or whether it's the panel that they're using or whatever it is, it seems like the text and all the little icons are sort of floating in there, you know?
Mm,
And so it's just kinda it's just kinda weird. I can't one of the knocks on OLED TVs had always been that, they might top out at 700 or 900 nits, but the
mhm.
contrast is so good that
It's like a
it
million to
can
one, you know?
yeah. So, but then you look at QLED or now they've got Q QD OLED. So it's
I
like
can't
a
even keep up with that stuff. It's it's so far out.
I don't know either. Like, so the screen that I have behind me is a Samsung QD OLED 49-inch monitor.
Mhm.
And
Was it the G9?
it's the G9 OLED.
Okay.
And it is really impressive. I have to say though that at least for me, once you get to a certain level of quality, like you might notice it when you first like plug it in and boot up your computer and you're like, "Oh." But once
Whoa,
you
and then
use
it
it
goes
for a
away.
couple of days. Yeah. Once you
It's
use it for a
so
couple of days,
and
yeah.
and that's a funny thing going like talking about 120 hertz, 90 hertz and stuff. When you go from a 60 hertz screen to a 90 hertz or 120 hertz for the very first time, your eyes look at it, you're like, wow, this looks so much smoother. But after you use a 120 hertz screen for a day, your eyes get so used to it. I liken it to smells. So like you smell something, like you're after you smell something for about 5 minutes, your brain cuts off that, okay, it
Yeah.
doesn't register that smell anymore because it's constant. And that's
Right.
kind of the same way I feel like your brain does with the phones. It just gets so used to it being that smooth, it doesn't really notice how impressive it is anymore.
See, and that's the weird thing to me because I if I look at a 60 hertz screen and a 120 hertz screen and I look for what I know to be the differences, I can see them,
Mhm.
but and I've said this in videos before and people lose their minds, but when I go from one to the other in a phone size screen, I can't I can't really like in daily use notice the difference.
I
Maybe
think
if I
everyone
played games on my phone, it would be a different thing, but I don't play games on my phone typically.
I'm still playing Boom Beach like 10 years later. I'm like one of the 8 people, and really at this point, I just wanna quit, but I feel like it's almost like a drug addiction. Like, I feel so compulsed to open it up, and I've been playing it for so long, I just can't break
Right.
up with it. So, at this point,
Yeah,
there's not a whole lot of joy in it anymore. I just have to every day
it's like
press
a
the button
marriage.
and yeah. Well, no, honey, it's not. Don't watch this. Actually, it's funny, my wife and I, our 11-year wedding anniversary is next week. Well, it's on the 20th.
Congratulations.
Well, I saw
My
recently you and your wife's was what, 26 years or
26 years,
I have a
31
good
years together.
I have a good memory.
Yeah, you do. That's good.
Yeah,
Um,
somebody's
and
it's funny as antisocial as we both are, there's somebody out there who's decided that they want to stick with us for a long time
yeah,
and put up with our
and
craziness.
for me, like, the adopted kid who always feels like everybody's going to leave. uh, the fact that someone has like stuck around and lived with me for 31 years basically is mind-boggling. I just I keep think every once in a while I say to her like, "Aren't you like tired of this?" And she's like, "Yes." But but, but I'm still here.
Well,
Okay.
mine is, everyone's like, man, it's like you've actually put up with you've actually put up with being married to somebody for that long. I'm like, oh, I don't have to put up with her. I'm the one that has to be put up with in this relationship.
Oh man. I know well, I don't know, but I can only imagine how difficult it is to live day in and day out with me. It's
I feel like
because
though with my wife, you know how I was talking about like your eyes don't pay attention to the 120 hertz, and then your nose shuts off after a few minutes. I
she doesn't smell you anymore.
her ears just quit listening to me years
Yeah,
ago, and she just tunes me out.
it is really funny, and you hear those jokes all the time about how, after a certain while, whatever frequency your spouse's voice is on is just becomes a blind spot. Um, but it is true, and sometimes I wonder, am I doing it as some sort of passive aggressive way to annoy this person, or can I honestly not hear? And I think now that I'm over 50, like, I've lost hearing. I was not responsible in my younger days in band practices in 8 by 10 rooms and
Uh,
really loud rock and roll shows in small venues. So I have some significant, maybe not as significant, but I have tinnitus in this ear.
oh,
And
I have tinnitus. After 16 and a half years of active duty, like military
yeah,
police service, I don't hear so good. Uh, yeah, I worked around airplanes that were
yeah,
actively taking off with no hearing protection for years. So I mean,
yeah,
I don't hear so good.
that'll do it. That'll do it. And, just the natural progression of age. But I turn so 5 days after your anniversary, I turned 52 years old, which, like, with each passing I've already just started saying I'm 52 years old. Like, at this point, why
It's
not?
just proactively just assuming the
Because, like,
identity of a
it's
52.
only another month, like, I've ever since, like, September, I've just been saying I'm 52.
I
So
turned so I turned 40 in January. And it's
mhm,
funny for me because I don't know, I've been like an old man my whole life, just living in a younger
right.
person's body. So I just feel like I'm catching up. I don't really think about the age stuff so much now as I'm just like I just assume one day I'll just wake up dead. And then I've reached the point where I don't really care about the years. I'm just glad, to have another day.
Yeah, I think that I always have this sort of vestigial image of myself in my brain as being like 27 years old. And the further I've gotten away from that age, and the more things have hurt, just in general, for no reason except for the fact that the machine is wearing down. Um,
Well, it's painfully honest existence is what it is.
yeah, that's basically, yeah. I've got this finger, first digit, arthritis, tendonitis, both elbows. Oh, it's terrible. But anyway, back to the Pixel 8 and 8 Pro. So, what are the differences this year between the 2 phones?
So there are a few differences. One, of course, you got the larger screen.
Right.
So we're gonna get the 6.7-inch screen with the Pixel 8 Pro, and then we've got, I believe it's a 6.2-inch. Let me look
Okay.
here. I believe it's a 6.2 inch, and then of course you've got the Quad HD Plus, 120 hertz, and the Pixel 8 Pro, the Pixel 7. It did get a bump up. It's no longer 90 hertz. It's 120 hertz. It's
Right.
1080p. They have the same tensor core. They have the same primary camera. But of course, when you get into the other things like, okay, the Pixel 8 Pro has the telephoto lens, and
Right.
it has, I believe, it has a macro capability, but it has the telephoto lens. You only get the ultra wide with the Pixel 8. You only get the two cameras. So
Right.
the Pro gives you all three, but they got an upgrade because the Pixel 8 Pro, yeah, it can do the macro, but it's got a 48 megapixel ultra wide instead of the last year, like the 12 megapixel in the 8. So
Right.
there are some camera distinctions there. They both have the same selfie. They both can do 4K 60 video on the front and the back, all that great stuff. Um, Bigger battery, of course, with the 8 Pro. More RAM. You get the 12 gigabytes instead of the 8. So there's always like a little. They try to distinguish them a little bit, each year.
Right.
And of course, the price tag will reflect that. $999. They did a price jump. So last few
Yeah.
years, they were kind of the best in the business with their pro model being $899 and the lesser model being $599. Now they're a little bit higher, $699 and $999.
Yeah. $699 still feels okay.
It feels
Um,
okay, but it makes people a little angry when they're like, "Oh, it was $599 before." I mean, everybody's always going to be upset a little bit, but I think it's still within the realm of fairness.
and I think now that they've settled into, what is this, 3 years of the A series phones? So we're on the
Oh,
7A.
we're supposed to talk the warranty 7 and 7, 7 years,
Oh
not
my
the
god.
drink, not the Seagram 7 and 7. We're talking 7 years of operating system updates, 7 years of security patches, and I
Yeah.
have fundamental issues with that because I don't think
I
it's realistic.
No, I don't either. I mean, I know that over the past few years, as things have balanced out between the upper echelon Android phones and the upper echelon iPhones, I feel like one of the big pluses that the iPhones had over Android phones was that, yeah, an iPhone can last for 5 to 6 years with current software updates, right?
Yeah,
And then you can use them beyond that, you're just not getting the most recent software. And for a long time, it seemed like Android phones were good for 3 years,
three
maybe?
years was really about the shelf life. And I felt like when Samsung even moved to 3 years, like they're like, "Oh, we're gonna 3 years of operating system updates." I didn't feel comfortable with having a Samsung phone for 3 years because after the
Yeah,
first year, they would just bog down so much. By the time the new one came out, it felt like it was forced attrition. Like they were just would be so crappy after a year, you would have to get a new one.
yeah. And so in some of the shorts that I put out of last week's episode, we've been getting some comments, and some of the comments have been like, "Well, I have my Galaxy S3 or Note 3, and it's still great." I'm like, "Okay, that's
Some people still drive a 1988 Ford Taurus too, but that's an exception. That's not a rule. That's not a
and
general culture thing.
you can't make any suppositions from an experiment that you've run on, that has an n of 1. It's like my experience versus like all of the other stuff out there does not a fact make. And I
It's not
don't blame
reality.
people. I don't blame people for looking at their lived experience and overvaluing it, and especially if they want to make an argument.
Well, it's their
So
argument. It's their reality, and I don't want to offend anybody or say like there's nothing wrong with that. If
well,
you want to use the
I
same phone
do.
for 6 or 7 years, well, you can. I'm on the other side. See, you have a dark background. I have a light background. Like we're like
Yes,
the
I'm over
I'm
here
the
to the
night.
dark side.
So
Yeah, no,
if
I get it.
somebody, yeah, if you want to use your phone for 7 years, there's nothing wrong with that. But my ex be like, I cannot grab an Android phone from 7 years ago. And
Right.
granted, we've made a lot of strides in the last 7 years. But when you take a look at Google's history of not actually supporting their products and getting rid of them all the time,
Like s- like killing them before they've had a chance to thrive in many
yeah,
ways. And
like
I've
the
heard
Google
people make
Stadia,
the
that they
argument
were,
that that's their software products and they always replace them with new software products. It's like, no, this is a pattern.
yeah, it's the
It is
same
a
Google.
pattern that Google has established. You can go online and you can look up Google Graveyard and you can see the dozens of things that they've killed before their time.
But you also
And
have to look at a couple other things like, but we hear all the time about people who are like, "Oh yeah, my battery just started like their 3-year-old phone, the battery just starts bloating and busts the steam on their phone." I mean,
yeah,
battery technology today is not designed to hold up for 7 years. I mean, case in point, we were talking last week about iPhone charging cycles. 500
yeah,
charging cycles to 80%. And most
right.
people will hit that in 3 to 4 years. Imagine 7 years, you're going to be what, 40% battery health?
Yeah, but so what I've heard is that Google is going to make these phones more repairable, and there are gonna be iFixit guides and parts to let people repair their phones. Now, I realize that right to repair is a prickly topic, and I get it. And I think it's good that people are gonna offer this as an option, so Google is saying, "If you wanna repair your phone, you can repair your phone, and iFixit will put together a guide for you, and they will sell you the parts or whatever." But still,
I don't think
in
that's
se
realistic.
in 7 years, right? In 7 years, that's 2040 or 2030, right?
Mhm.
And you who even knows if slab cell phones are gonna be, like, the
A
thing?
thing. Like 7 years ago, we were on the Nexus. I mean,
Yeah,
so there's that, but if you also take a look at it, lots of features become obsolete or they don't support anymore. I mean, we're not even getting support really for Android 8 anymore. Android 8.1, I've gotten my BlackBerry phones, and apps are starting to not be supported for that. So even if the developer, let's say the
yeah,
operating system is still good 7 years from now, will your apps and software that you're using on your phone still be supported?
yeah, that's making 7 years of support for both security and operating system updates is
It's one of
I
those things where
believe it's a bridge too far for
I
me.
think that, and we'll have people that get mad at us for saying this, but I think if they had done, let's say, 5 years of operating system updates, 7 years of security patches, that would even be more acceptable. Because when you look at the life cycle of a phone, what happens at about 3 year mark? Everybody trades in their old phone and gets a new one.
Right.
By time a Pixel phone is 3 years old, it has no worth, even 4 or 5 years. So even if you would be doing yourself a disservice by hanging on to it for 7 years, because at the 3 year mark with your carrier, likely you can still trade it in and get a new Pixel 10 for free.
Yeah.
So why are you hanging on to it by that? Like, people are learning this the hard way. The Pixel 6, you can trade it in for like $150.
Yeah.
It's worthless.
Well, I mean, so I still have my LG V50, and I can't trade it in for anything.
Yeah,
Like,
well, LG doesn't exist anymore.
I know, but it's like when when I've looked at the trade-in things, I always like to put my LG phone in there to see, like, what I could get for it, and over the past couple of years, it was like, $300, $200.
160.
Yeah, and this year, it was just
We'll
recycle
recycle it.
only.
I saw that.
And I was just like, "Oh,
I
that's
will
so."
I wanna give a shout out here to LG though, because when they said we're pulling up this tent stakes, we're moving on, they still said we're gonna support this for the full 3 years.
Yeah,
And they did. Like the V60, the Wing, the G8, there was like several phones that actually got that they got Android 13.
yeah,
And I was
yeah.
really impressed by that they still did that. So thank you, LG, even from the grave, still supporting your phones.
Yeah, they had a couple of janitors that they promoted to IT guys that just sat there and, like, they said, "Okay, in 2 years, hit this button. In 1 year, hit this button, and in 3 years, hit this button."
I cus
And
I still, in my heart of hearts, hope that LG comes back one day. Like, they're not a BlackBerry. See, BlackBerry, they just screwed everything up, and they're like made themselves completely obsolete. But
right.
LG made like $50 billion of profit last year. Like, LG as a corporation is a very profitable company. They were just losing $1 billion a year on their handset division. So I
Well,
thought maybe
and the crazy thing about that is that at the time LG announced they were leaving the market,
they're like 13% market share.
yeah, yeah,
Like,
they had
people right now,
13% of the US market.
Google has like 2 to
I know.
3%, and Motorola has like 2 to 3. There are brands right now that would like crap their pants if they woke up the next day and had a 13% market share.
Yeah.
So just the idea that they vacated that with that much market share tells you they just didn't see they did not have a good like their pulse on the future was not good.
Well, I had so this is one thing that I've wondered about that. So if they have 13% of the market share, but the the return on investment is not as large because the majority of the phones they're selling are budget $200 and $300 phones.
That's why their market share was so large, not their flagships. People were
Yeah,
going and getting the LG Stylos, they were getting the LG K series that you could
yeah,
get, and they were going into Metro, T-Mobile,
yeah,
Cricket, places like that, and they were really top selling phones that they had there.
yeah. And so I think even though LG had that market share, and I don't know how they calculated that number. It could have just been number of handsets in use at that time, or it could have been based on money made, but that's a hard number to pin down for any one company, really.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think with LG, they just recognized that I think they probably had an internal sort of kill switch. If at this point
Punch out.
we are if at this point we are not making money
Use a
on our
parachute.
smartphone division, then we'll just shut the lights off.
And I that
And
it really surprised me because LG's been around for forever. Like LG's
yeah,
been making stuff. I mean, my first ever flip phone in like the year 2000
yeah,
was an LG. And I would only get an LG phone back then because the LG flip phones were so good.
right.
So it was really an interesting thing to see, and it all happened about the same time because the year before, basically, BlackBerry died. You know, the year after that, LG died. A year before that, HTC or Motorola, they before they were reborn. So it's been
I remember I think around the time that BlackBerry released like the BlackBerry,
with the P2.
there was the one that had the little it was an Android phone, but it had
Oh, the
the stuff.
Priv.
Yeah, the Priv, which
Mhm.
I'm just like, no wonder it didn't succeed because what the heck is that name all about, right?
The name was stupid.
Yeah,
I hammered John Chen, and that's probably why he never sent me anything either. But I mean, so when it came to those phones, I actually wasn't making videos back then. I was just I had a funny joke because back then people were still lining up at like the AT&T stores and stuff
to get the
to
iPhones.
get the
Yeah,
iPhone.
yeah,
So I was very active in Crackberry back then, and I made a post. I was like, I I took a picture. I was like, I'm standing here in the line to get my Priv at the AT&T store, and I took a picture of the front. There was nobody there.
yeah,
I went in. They're like, "Oh yeah, we got this phone. I don't really know anything about it." I'm like, "I do. Just sell it to me." It
yeah. I tried that phone out, and
was hot garbage.
it was hot, like very hot,
Yeah, and that
actually.
yeah, I was gonna talk about that because now it's funny because 'cause they're like, "Oh, the iPhone gets so hot," and I'm like, "You never held a BlackBerry Priv, did you?"
Yeah, I really liked that phone, but the heating issue also affected the battery, and then there wasn't enough developer support for the BlackBerry version of the operating system,
Well,
you
do you
know?
remember what happened that year? So, that year gave us 2 phones that were very, very hot that came from Qualcomm. They had the 808 and, like, the 806 or whatever, but that 8 series,
Yeah,
the S6, Samsung actually waived on it. They said, "We're not using the Qualcomm this year because we can't control the thermals," and that's the 1 year, the S6, they used the Exynos globally.
right.
And then the next year they picked up with the 821, but it was just funny because or no, the fall, was it the fall release? I don't know. Anyway, but yeah, they skipped that year and they used the Exynos. I was like, what is this Exynos chip in the S6?
I just remember that year was that was like 2015, wasn't it?
Yeah, because the G Flex 2 was the other one that got insanely hot. Eh,
Yeah, and that's when LG was kind of like, I mean, they always did interesting things with their phone, but the Flex phones with the curved screen, that was very interesting.
Well, that was funny because you remember the reason that they built it and they built it with the self healing back, but you could flatten it out. So they're like, you can
Right.
sit this in your back pocket and it won't bend your phone. And that's like basically the butt cheek curve is, I guess, how they got
Yeah,
the idea
yeah,
for the that you won't bend your phone. Because
yeah.
remember the iPhone 6 Plus and Bendgate.
Well, there was the 6 and the 6 Plus were both bendy, but
Yeah,
the
the fir-
6 Plus definitely was
more
more
bendable.
prone to it because it had more surface area, you know? But, I remember that year I tried the Priv and I returned it because just it didn't work
It was
the way
terrible.
that you know.
It would lock, like, your apps would lock up. It would get
Yeah,
super hot. It didn't have enough RAM. The battery life was it was. as a BlackBerry enthusiast, I wanted it to succeed, but at the same time, I'm like, this is crap.
Yeah, and then after that, I tried the Windows Phone,
Oh
the
my gosh.
Nokia 1050, I believe it was.
Actually, I had so the Nokia phones could get warm too, but I had the big one that had the 42 megapixel camera or whatever it was,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
actually I got it like the last year they were supporting Windows OS, and I
yeah.
actually really liked it.
I liked the one that I had. It was the model right after the the big honking camera.
Was it the 1020?
The 1020 was the one with the big camera, and I think the 1050
Was
is the
the
was
successor?
the next one. And it was interesting because it was like this big rectangle,
It's a big phone.
and it had like tapered edges, not curved, but tapered edges. It was kind of like a little pillow.
That would rock. If you
Yeah,
put it on the table, you could rock it from side to side because of the beveled, like,
and
weird contour.
I loved the Windows operating system. I loved that sort of tiled, like two-dimensional operating system.
Well, actually, I liked it, but it was funny because a lot of people really liked the tile system with the Windows Phone, but they hated Windows 8, which was all tile based, and it was garbage.
But that sort of touch-based idea of Windows, once they got to Windows 10 and, kind of ironed it out a little bit more and had more success with that kind of design with the Surface products, it made more sense. But the thing that really killed that phone for me was the ports of the apps that you wanted to use.
Oh yeah,
The
you couldn't
ports
use
of
half the apps you wanted.
Facebook or any of that stuff. You couldn't get like any of the audio players.
Well,
You know
that's what killed BlackBerry as well. Like you couldn't get Instagram. Like they had somebody had made a native client and actually got shut down, I think, by
Yeah.
Instagram. And
Eh,
so Instagram, Pinterest, Facebook, like Facebook, you could get on BlackBerry 10, and Twitter you could get, but pretty much anything else you're out of luck.
yeah, and, for apps like that who at that time, I don't think they had very robust, like, browser clients for mobile devices.
No,
And the way that Windows Phone was supposed to work was that, you have this two-dimensional tile system, and you're supposed to be able to flip those tiles over and be into. But if you don't have a port of an app that's gonna play well with that, then the whole experience gets broken.
yeah,
So I ended up not being able to keep that either. And I think I went from that phone to the V10.
I
That
like
was
the V10. It's funny because the V20 had horrible heating problems too, but it had the Snapdragon. Was it the 821?
I think that's right.
Uh, no, it wasn't the 821.
821 or the 820 maybe?
I think it was the 820, and it's funny
Yeah.
because one of them, like the 821, wasn't the greatest, but the 821 was oddly enough the first chip in the original Pixel, if I remember correctly.
That might be right. Um, yeah, there were so many. This is what kills me. There were so many choices of different kinds of phones that tried to do things in different ways at that time, like 2015, 2016. And then once we got to 2017, 18, everything that was cool and interesting had gone away. The BlackBerry stuff had died, the Windows Phone had died, and LG was still trying to do interesting things, but it took a few generations for the V series to really become a reliably usable phone. Like, I thought the V10 was the coolest thing in the world. It had stainless steel rails, and it
It
and it
had the
had, like,
dual display, the secondary screen up top,
the removable back and still, like, the
removable
higher
battery.
end headphone jack.
Yep, it had the
So,
DAC.
I think it had I think it had
820. I was right. It had the Snapdragon 820.
So I think the V10 or at least one of the V series phones had like dual SIM card or dual SD card slots, because the whole idea, this was before streaming was really like
I don't know.
this. So the idea of the V series phones was, they give you the better headphone jack, and it's sort of the audiophiles uh phone, because at that time streaming hadn't completely taken over from, actual files on your devices. I think the thing that we could talk about now to kind of round out the podcast is to go back, and now we're 2.5 weeks into iPhone 15 life, right? And so let's check in quickly with each of us to see how we've been faring. I know, because we've talked about it for a couple of weeks now, but how are we faring now that we're sort of getting used to them and that we're living with them for a little longer? How are you feeling about your iPhone 15 experience?
So I'm on the same page as you now. I ended up returning the Pro and keeping the Pro Max because the battery life was just insanely so much better. I
Yeah,
really like the Pro. I like the size, form factor, all that stuff, but the battery life, it was just not good. So I'm in the Pro Max life. And I got to tell you, I've been trying something. I was inspired when you were talking about how you used your iPhone 12 with no case for 3 years. And I'm
right.
like, you know what? I've got Apple Care on this sucker. They made it lighter. They've made it out of titanium now. It's a little bit lighter. I like the rounded corners. There's just stuff you can't appreciate if you have a case on
Yeah,
it. So prior to me taking my kids to San Antonio the last few days, I've been using it for a couple of days with no case. First time I've ever done that, and it's been I still worry about dropping it, but like I said, I have Apple Care, so I don't worry too much. But I love the action button. I love the changes with the form factor. I love the curved edges. The cameras have really been impressing me this year,
yep,
especially. I didn't think the 5 times was going to be that big of a deal, but I went to my son's football game last week, and it makes a big deal, especially with video zooming.
yeah, yeah.
So I've
No,
been overall pretty happy with it. I think it's so far for me, it's been a good experience.
yeah, for me too. You know, there are little things coming from the 12, which of course didn't have the dynamic island and that kind of stuff. And I still think the dynamic island is, I don't know, it is
You
what it
also
is.
didn't have
But
promotion.
that's true. That's true. But again, I don't really notice that consciously. Maybe I notice it unconsciously, but I will say that there are some things in iOS 17 that I really like. Um, but using this phone, usually there's like a sort of rough patch, like a week or 2, where it's like, "Oh, now I gotta get this phone sort of up to speed and everything plugged in and blah, blah, blah." Even my Hue lights, usually if you put the Hue app on a new phone,
You have to
you have
reset
to
everything
go
up.
and press the button, but
It's
I
really
didn't
annoying.
have to. I didn't have to. Like, I just was like, "Well, what would happen if I opened my Hue app right now and tried to use it?" And it just worked.
I think that this has probably been the most seamless transition from an iPhone to a new iPhone experience that I've had. And I historically, people know I don't really care for iPhone. And as much as I don't really care for iPhone, I've actually enjoyed this experience. And I think that that's a pretty good testament to the company formerly owned by Steve Jobs.
Yeah. Yeah, the screen is great. Um,
Screen's nice.
the the cameras, I haven't used the cameras a ton, but when I have, like, my dream for a phone camera is that when I use it, I don't have to think about what I'm doing, right? I wanna take a video or I wanna take a photo, and it just happens. And, yeah, this camera is really nice. We were talking about it a little bit before we started recording, but when I was doing my initial review, I went around the house and I went outside in the backyard and I took some photos with all the different lenses and did some video and stuff like that. And I was super impressed with just with literally like point and shoot. Don't try and do too much fancy stuff. Just let it focus itself and get what you're trying to get. And the photos look great. I mean, just
I've been pretty
so
impressed. And
natural.
they did diminish the lens flare a little bit too. They put a new coating on the lens. Now it's still there. Like the lens flare is still there, but it's not as bad as it has been the last couple of years.
And see, that's the thing. That's another thing that I don't really notice as much as other people do. Um, I've
Well,
loved
go to
I've
a
loved
nighttime football game and you'll learn real quick.
yeah, I that's probably true. But I have loved the iPhone cameras ever since, like, the iPhone I can't remember which one. I think the iPhone 5 was my first iPhone, and I remember going I had an opportunity to take a little sabbatical and go stay in the woods in Virginia for a month and finish my first novel.
That's cool.
And so I was at this little writer's retreat, and it was literally like dirt roads back to where there were like 3 houses on a dirt road. And every afternoon I would go take a walk, and I had one of these like retro looking camera apps, and I just would walk around and take photos, and I swear like those still come up in my carousel of like photos every once in a while, and I'm like, that is such a cool photo. And
I think the
I
iPhone 5 though, it's was the 5 is the one where they really started taking the photography more seriously because
right.
they used
Yeah.
that same rinky dink like 5 megapixel or 7 megapixel camera for a long time. I think
Right.
in the 5 when they bumped it to the 12.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. But yeah, ever since my first iPhone, I've just always loved and trusted the iPhone camera. And they haven't always been perfect, but I wasn't it the iPhone 7 that Steven Soderbergh used to film an entire feature film? iPhone 7 or 8? I
They've
can't
been
remember
doing some
which.
crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Let me see. So yeah,
So
the camera, the 8 megapixel camera. Maybe it was the 6 where they bumped to the 12. I don't know, but either way, they really started taking camera stuff a lot more serious around that era.
yeah. Yeah, and I think for me, it was just that idea that like, holy crap, I've got this phone, and yet it takes really cool looking photos as well, and I can sort of be artistic with how I'm taking these photos, and all I have to do is pay like 99 cents for this app.
Hmm.
I just like stuff like that. I like character, and always try and go for that more than, even now after reviewing phones for all these years, I'm not too much of somebody who talks about cameras, because I
They're
just
also
let
good.
they're also good, but sometimes the uniqueness of a camera is in what it does poorly or differently
Hmm.
than any other camera. Although the orange face selfie camera stuff that's happened with the iPhone for the past
It,
several years, it's not
it's not
I
completely gone.
no, but it's still like you take a photo and you look like an Oompa Loompa.
Oh yeah, I took a video. Like I took a picture of my wife a few years ago. It was out in the sun. She was in her car, and I think this was like the iPhone 12. I think it was the 12 Pro,
Right.
green one. Green was the 12 Pro, wasn't it?
13.
Sorry, was it 11? 11 had a green one too, though.
I don't remember. I don't remember. I know the iPhone 12, the special color was that Pacific blue, right?
I think we had a there was a green iPhone because it was so rounded, wasn't it?
Um, I can't
Uh,
remember.
yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
don't.
So they had the green. That's what it was. So I had the green 11 Pro Max, and it was taking pictures. Like, man, this takes such good pictures. And I took a picture of my wife sitting in her car with like the sunlight hitting her, and she looked like a poster child for like a Trump rally, like just orange, like orange, orange. I was like, God, I can't even share it. They're like, this is bad. You don't even look
Yeah.
like the same person. I had posted a similar picture. I had taken a different one in different lighting. I posted them like which phone took which picture. I was like, the same one. So
uh, so maybe this is the best time to end the podcast, because now that you have invoked the name of he who shall not be named, I don't want to make like all the jokes that I would make, and
that's okay.
you
I don't
know,
want to. The only reason I said that is because everybody knows how fake orange the dude's face looks. So,
yeah.
like, you could get that picture of like, this is what my iPhone picture looked like. It was an orange face.
See, the joke I was immediately going to make is like, if he does end up going to prison, how are they going to tell his face from his jumpsuit?
That's pretty good. That's a pretty good one.
Anyway,
Yeah, we're
anyway,
done.
you've been here with us, the comedy hour of Painfully Honest Tech podcast. It's a podcast so honest it hurts. We've got Mr. Tech Odyssey himself, Adam Madlock here, back for another episode, and then myself, Jason. Jason T. Lewis, the JTL. Uh, we'll be back next week with some more stuff. By next
More
week,
stuff.
we'll have the pixels in hand by next week, won't
Yeah,
we?
that'll be really cool. Yeah,
So
we'll have the
we'll
pixels.
be able to talk about that. We'll try and find something like non-cell phone related to talk about as well, because try and branch out into, maybe we'll talk about um there's a story here. Google is already bringing back software features that removed because of Sonos lawsuit, and I remember that, but I need to read this article before I talk about it. So anyway,
We'll re-educate ourselves for a week.
yeah. Anyway, thanks so much for being here, folks. Once again, hit that like, subscribe button, come back and watch the podcast again, and I'll figure out the audio one of these days, and then you'll be able to listen to the podcast while you're out on your constitutional walk for the day, and it'll be good. It'll be fun. But
Hey, I tell you
that'll
what, before we sign off,
yeah,
when we get to that point one day, if you actually walk for an hour and a half, we're going to really increase the health of a lot of people that listen to this podcast.
that's the goal. That's the goal, man. I want healthy viewership, listenership, so that they can be there for me
Yeah,
in my old age.
walk for an hour and a half while you listen to the
That's
show.
right. Okay, folks. Until next time, once again, I forget what I'm going to say. Anyway, this has been Painfully Aztec, Textile Honest Nerds. Until the next time, we are out.